Yo, what's going on, guys? Hanging Huntadors here. My name is Dimitri, and in today's video, we're continuing on with the most in-depth, with the most detailed arrow building guide. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get right into it. Alright guys, so real quick before we jump into the actual video itself, I just want to mention that there are 3 other parts to this series. This is part 4. So if you guys are interested in any of those, we will have little markers in the description showing you the title and what each video is about, as well as links to them, so you guys can go and check it out. But make sure that you come back, because in this video we're going to be going over the actual build process. We just give you quick little snippets and just pointers on how to do it as we go along, and we just kind of go along and do an actual arrow build with you guys. So to start things off, we're going to be giving you a list of everything that you're going to need to build the arrows and go from there. Alright guys, so jumping right into the tools, this right here is the arrow saw. This is a D-Cut Pro. Very nice. It's got a little knob here that we turn for mass gain adjustments, and then we got little knobs on the knock side and the sled to do micro adjustments. So that was the arrow saw. We're also going to need some sort of hacksaw and or Dremel tool with cutoff blades to cut down the inserts. So that's why I have this here. Then this right here is an arrow squaring tool. This is the G5 ASD Flip. Nice tool. There are a few out there, but this one seems to be the best one that I've used. Then we're going to need a silver Sharpie. This is for many things you'll see in the future. We're going to need some acetone and or isopropyl alcohol. This is what we use to clean the base of the shafts, but we will be doing a video in the future going over whether or not you actually need a primer pen. We will be testing these things out and seeing how they do on the base of the veins that you normally need a primer pen for. We're also going to need some Q-tips. These are to clean the insides of the arrows, as well as we'll cut them up and make little stirring sticks out of them. We're going to need a fletching jig. This is the Blitzenberger Fletch-O-Matic fletching jig. There are many jigs out there. Whichever one you have will probably work. But we're going to need something to stick the fletchings onto our arrows. This right here is the AAE Max Weld primer pen. Now, this is what I used on these tag veins, but you don't need this. Again, we'll be doing a video in the future with acetone and seeing how that works. We're also going to need a scale. This is just to measure the parts before we actually do the final glue up. Make sure that everything's sitting right where it should be. Next up on the list is the EASTON HIT epoxy. This is 24-hour epoxy, which is my favorite. It's going to be stronger and less brittle than the 5-minute epoxies that you might see. Then we're going to need glue to glue on our veins. This is the tack glue. I've used the Max Bond glue that you'll see here in a sec in the past, and both of them work well. Whichever glue you use is up to you, but super glue for the veins. Alright guys, so now to get started, what we're going to do is we're going to grab our notepad and get to cutting our arrows. So as you can see here from the last video, when we figured out what length our arrow needed to be, we went ahead and figured out that we're going to need an arrow 28.5 inches. So what I'm doing right now is I'm getting my insert, putting it in the end of the arrow, and what we're going to do is we're going to figure out just how long that insert is and how much arrow we have to cut off to accommodate for the length of our insert. So if you look here, it's right about a 1/2 inch. So we're going to go ahead and just take a 1/2 inch off of the 28 inches that I originally accounted for, and that's just going to sum that up. Now, one oversight that I made that I want you guys to know is I didn't account for the outsert. So the outsert on these Ethics Archery insert outsert kits are also a 1/2 inch in length. So yeah, one oversight I made. Make sure that you guys measure the insert and the outsert before you do that, because realistically I would be cutting my arrows at 27 inches or 27.5 inches. So if you look here now, I lined the one hash mark on the tape up with the throat of the knock, and then I go ahead and run it along the arrow shaft, and I have to cut them at 29 if I want my arrow to be at 28, just for that 1 inch little overhang. I do that. It's an old carpenter trick. It just makes it easier to see where your actual markings are. And I just take my Sharpie, mark out the 29 inches, and as you can see here, if I were to do this the right way, obviously I would take another 1/2 inch off, but as you can see here, I'm just showing you that the insert lines up right with my mark on my old arrow from the video when I drew my bow back and figured out right where I wanted my arrow length to be. Now we're setting up the saw here. I like to do the mass gain adjustment with that little knob on this D-Cut Pro saw. It's a great saw. And then on the back, it has this little like micro drive knob. So I'm just micro driving the arrow right until the blade is just about cutting my mark in half that I made. So as you can see there, it's cutting the mark right in half. And then now we're going to set the blade depth of cut. So we want the blade to just barely cut through the end, or just barely cut through the wall of the arrow, the thickness of the wall. And the reason why we want to do that is because when we rotate the arrow, it will cut just the wall around that's touching the blade, and it'll make it so it's a nice square cut. And then this right here is just showing how we put the nock in the groove. We push down and back. And then right here, this is just how we do it. We start the arrow on the very far side of the gate closest to you, and then push it into the blade and rotate, as you see there. And also, you want to make sure that you're grabbing the arrow from the two ends. You never want to grab it from the center, because it'll bow the arrow, and that will cause an unsquare cut, and we don't want that. And then as you can see here, we just push it in. We rotate against the rotation of the blade, and that helps with just like burring and stuff on the inside of the arrow. And as you can see here, nice clean cut, and it's pretty damn square. So now we just do this to all 12. And like I said, make sure you're holding from the ends of the arrow and rotate against the direction of the blade. Now that we got all 12 cut, we can go ahead and move on. We don't need the saw anymore, so we can go ahead and get this thing out of here. And what we're going to do is we're going to grab our nock installation tool out of our bag of nocks, and we're going to go ahead and start removing all the nocks from these old arrows. Now we have to do this one for gluing in the inserts, because we have to get them removed so that when you go ahead and place the insert inside of the arrow shaft, there's a buildup in pressure, and it can actually slowly push your insert out. And we're going to square the arrow like we're doing now. So we're just going to get our silver Sharpie. We're going to go along and paint the entire outside edge of the arrow shaft here. We're going to do this for both sides, the nock side and the insert side. And then we're going to go ahead and grab our arrow squaring tool. This is the G5 ASD Flip. It's a great tool. And as you can see here, I put some painter's tape over the guides. That just helps it from scratching the arrow shafts. And then once all of the silver Sharpie is gone, then we know that the arrow shaft is square. Now what we're going to do is we're going to get this little stone that comes in the EASTON HIT epoxy bag, and this little nippled stone is going to bevel or chamfer the inside of the arrow shaft, because the nocks are never actually like molded and casted square, so it can cause a little bit of flexing if it doesn't sit flush, and that can give you a little bit of variance in your shot. So we do that so the nock sits perfectly flat on the end of the arrow shaft. Now we're taking out our inserts. We're just going to figure out where we need to cut them. So as you can see, I figured it there, and then I ended up adding one by accident on this piece. We end up going back and we cut them all one notch shorter. But you can go to Ethics Archery on their website, and they actually have a little picture with a bunch of different weights, and you can figure out what system you need. So as you can see, we got all 12 of them cut here. Like I said, we ended up taking one off of that example, and that's it right there. And as you can see, the ends are kind of jagged. We don't want to stick those just in the end of the arrow shaft. What we got is we got a little sanding disc on a Dremel. Now we're just going to go ahead and we're going to sand the ends so that they're nice and flat, 90 degrees, like so. And then we're just going to go around the edges and put a nice little bevel on there and round it over. What that's going to do is it's going to help the sharp edge, like a 90-degree edge, from fracturing the arrow if it were to hit and deflect. It just makes it so it's a nice smooth transition and doesn't dig into the side of the arrow shaft on the inside. Then we're just going to take some 220 grit sandpaper and we're going to go over the inserts. What this is going to do is just going to give the insert more surface area and more surface area for the epoxy to cling to. I like to do this just so that the epoxy isn't trying to cure on smooth stainless. This just helps it cure better. And I've shot a few arrows into straight up like tree bark into a solid tree at 3D shoots, and I've never had an insert come out no matter how hard I tugged. So it's the reason why I like to do that. It's more of a precaution thing. And now we're just going to grab a cup and we're going to go ahead and fill the cup up with some 70% alcohol. It really doesn't matter. It can be acetone. And we're just going to clean the surfaces. Now that we sanded them, we want to get these nice and clean so that the glue bonds really well to it. And then we're going to go ahead and clean the inside of the arrow shaft. Now, when you do this, you want to use a bunch of Q-tips, and you want to make sure that the Q-tip is completely carbon free. So as you can see here, there's no carbon residue, so we can move on. We want to do that to the knock side and the insert side. Now we're going to go ahead and grab our epoxy, but before we go ahead and glue everything up, I'd recommend getting all your components, grab your scale, and we're going to go ahead and do a quick dry scale up, I guess you would call it. So we're going to get our arrow and all of our components, throw it on the scale, and just get a quick measure before we glue everything up and make sure that we're looking right. And as you can see here, we're looking at 482. I don't know if you guys remember from the last video or the first video, but our target arrow weight was 480. So we pretty much hit the nail on the head with that one. And now what we're going to do is we're going to start mixing our epoxy. So I just got a piece of cardboard cut out here. I'm just putting a packaging tape over it. And the reason why we do that is because if you were to just put it straight on cardboard, it would absorb into the cardboard because cardboard's porous and you'd lose a little bit of epoxy. And then we just take a Q-tip, cut the head off of it as our little stirring stick. Make sure that we get all the hardener and the actual epoxy out because it's a 50-50 ratio and it's important. And we go ahead and mix the crap out of this in circular motions and in back and forth motions as you see here. And that just really helps minimize air bubbles. So like that, and then we just roll it off, and then we can grab our inserts and let those dry a little bit because they might still have some alcohol on them. And then we're just going to wait a little bit and let that epoxy set up because you don't want it to be too runny when we go ahead and glue them in. Now we're going to put the outsert over the insert and mark out where it is on our shaft. Obviously, this may be different for you guys depending on what systems you use. This is something that I'm required to do. With these Ethics archery kit, they require you to sand the outside of the arrow a little bit, which makes sense because, you know, manufacturing these, they can't make a specific insert for every single arrow. And basically, we just mark out, as you can see there, we just marked out where the outsert goes over, and then we actually have to sand the outside of the arrow shaft down that much so that it slides over it because the arrow shafts are a little bit bigger than the inside diameter of that collar. Now we just roll the insert into the epoxy a little bit, and then as you can see here, we have a decent amount on there, and we rotate as we spin down. Now make sure that you guys clean the arrow shafts after you sand too. Clean the inside because you may accumulate a little bit of residue on the inside of the shaft. And as you can see here, once you spin it down, you can use a cut-off Q-tip, just like we did to mix, and take all that excess out, and it leaves you with minimal cleanup at the end. As you can see, there's not like a ridiculous amount of extra epoxy coming off the back of that. We just take a paper towel, wipe them nice and clean, and as you can see, we're left with a nice finish there. And now this is 24 hours later. They're nice and cured, and they look pretty good. Now we're going to get the fletching jig out and get ready to fletch, but before we do that, we're going to go ahead and insert the nocks. So I ended up getting nocks to match my string color, so neon orange nocks, and we just go ahead and insert all these things. Now when we insert them, we make sure that we line up the throat of the nock and we index them with a graphic on the arrow shaft. So as you can see here, I line them up with the warning label. And what that does is it just gives me a reference so that if a fletching were to ever get nicked or fall off, I have that reference so I can spin the nock directly to that, put it in the jig, and then I'll always have the position on the arrow shaft of where the fletching went in case one were to fall off. And then we go ahead and we loosen up these little like adjusting knobs on the Blitzenberger fletching jig, and these are my settings. I'm not going to go into crazy detail showing you how to set up the fletching jig. That's a little hard to do filming by yourself. So if you guys are interested in the video, make sure you leave it down in the comments. We'll try that. I show you my stick out, and I just make sure that there is a 32nd of an inch of vein sticking out from the clamp, and then I do a dry fit up, and then I go ahead and get some of that alcohol that we had in the cup, and I wipe all of the shafts in my arrow down. This just gets any oils from your fingers off, and it gives you a nice clean surface to glue to. And you shake it, and that just flash dries the arrow. Alright guys, so unfortunately I lost the last segment of this little build series that I was doing. My SD card storage was full and I thought that I was recording it, but unfortunately I did not capture it. The final glue up of the vane. But basically what you do is you just put little beads of glue along the base of the vane, and then you make sure that when you slide the clamp in, the clamp is slid down all the way against the base of the fletching jig, and then you go ahead and you rotate it down and make sure you press it level against the arrow shaft, and then you push it down until it squeezes all the glue out of the base of the vane, and then you let that sit for about 30 seconds, and then you open up the clamp and then you pull it off the vane. And after that 30 seconds, then you're good to go. You spin the little ball detent knob on the bottom, do the next, do it again, do the next, and then you go from there. Now with the specific vanes that I was using, I actually needed to use the little primer pen, so make sure that if your vanes require you to do that, you do that. And yeah, that's it. So that's basically how it played out. Unfortunately, again, I didn't capture it because of that, but that's how it went. With that being said, that's pretty much going to wrap up the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked the video, a thumbs up would be much appreciated. If you guys have any questions, comments, anything like that, leave them in the comment section below. I will try my best to answer all of them with the best of my knowledge. And yeah, that's pretty much going to sum up the video. If you guys could hit us with a sub, that would be much appreciated. And we'll catch you in the next video. Ciao.